the students, and we found that even if you see the publications of the research publications of the different universities, it may not be, you can say, the be a considered as the worthy, or can be compared with the research paper even in the South Asian standards. And in the absence of all these critical discourses, of course, they catch in another phenomenon, which is not very new, but as well, this is quite a old phenomenon which is going on, and this is the glorification of Islam. This is they found that the ruling elite of the Muslim world, including Pakistan, are responsible for the loss of the Muslim glory. And this is very interesting that one side the state is trying to feed the narrative through showing the Turkish drama or the drama series, and trying to be project the Muslim past, the glory, somehow trying to be glorified the Muslim past, but it is having the very opposite impact on the youth, and they believe that these are the ruling elite; those are responsible for all this loss of the glory. A good number of educated youth, as I mentioned, have the moderate view about religion, but this is an issue of identity, and they believe that the Muslims are suffering because of the ignorance, and the glory can be achieved through practicing a moderate version of Islam. However, those who are inclined towards radicalism and extremist groups have power, and their links with their like-minded teachers help them to control the narrative. Nobody can challenge or disagree with them. The radical segments think of themselves as the custodian of the Pakistan's ideology and identify with establishment narratives. No content with their current strategy, they have more radical ambitions for achieving glory and for defeating the enemy of the Muslim world. This is the frightening scenario, of course, as it indicates that the human resource for the extremist and militant group is still available on our campuses. And another interesting, I think, the finding, which is linked with the Madrasa generation, that their potential hasn't been fully revealed yet, and we witness that they have the anger, the level of anger is very high, and before previously it was being their anger, their aggression mostly consumed by the different radical violent actors. But as the state is taking the many measures and trying to develop some surveillance over the Madrasa institutions in Pakistan, their expressions are also changing. And the Madrasa generations are getting more and more anti-establishment. We found that they also have the similar worldview or the mindset as the educated youth from the other public and private universities have, but they have the more belief in their self, as they think they have the right direction and the narrative or the message which can change or transform the state and society. So these were the few very key findings that we have found. And if I may summarize, that this is confusion is somehow is prevailing among educated youth. And the reason for the confusion is that critical thinking, the discourses are missing on campuses. There is a no conducive environment for utilizing uh, uh, their uh, their talent, and they have the less opportunities for the exposure. Student unions are banned, and all the forum which can provide a little outlet to their talent is also missing. And in this context, they rely on the social media, the rational narrative, and the mainstream media, and consume mainly the toxic narrative from the Urdu publications. If this is very hard, that how we can turn around or to transform the ongoing uh, the situation on campuses. But I think that apart from the lot of debates you may already have yesterday, or you will have in the upcoming sessions, the rule of law is, of course, is one of the major ingredient in every CVE, CT policy. But I think the nexus of the radical religious group, which has nurtured uh, on the education campuses, uh, need some review or the rethinking. State may allow the functioning of the student union. We can understand maybe the administrations of the universities or the colleges may not support this idea, because no authority like the transparency and accountability, and student union play this role very effectively. It may be the other societies, clubs are allowed on campuses. So this is very important. And when the political institutions are very weak in Pakistan, at least the provincial governments and the federal government can develop the devolve the powers to local governments, which can cater the needs of the youth in their respective areas. And most importantly, in their thinking pattern, the glory was one of the major factor. And but if one asks what is their major issues, they always talk about the their very local issues about the road network, the lack of health facilities, the hygiene, and the education, or and most importantly, in various parts of the country, the poor internet services. So these were the major issues. And in that context, maybe the universities will try to build these courses in their local perspective, and to empower youth, and to evolve a new political culture uh, in, in their surroundings. I think this is the most important task we found, that which may transform the ongoing uh, discourses on campuses. Otherwise, we have more than 244 religious groups in Pakistan, with from the mild to mild radical tendencies to the extremists, the very uh, uh, toxic radical tendencies. They will continue haunting us and continue attracting the youth towards their network through the narratives they offer. And it doesn't require the verification, it doesn't require the critical thinking. So these narratives seems very attractive. Is talk about the past, is talk about the glory, and when you have the poor thinking skills, so it made the job for the radical groups easier to trap the youth and the young mind. So these were my few humble submissions. If you will have the time for Q&A, I think we can elaborate and can explore a bit more of the topic. Thank you very much once again for having me for in this wonderful conference. Hello, Dr. Saab, I'm done with my presentation.
जी रान साहब, मैं सिर्फ एक थोड़ा सा एग्जामनी तो आपने जिक्र किया, you have talked about the role of local government in upbringing youth and taking care of them. Can you a little bit expand it with the local frameworks for CVE in context of community resilience?
Yeah, as Shafqat Saab, I mentioned that when we ask them about the key issues, they talk about all their local issues, and we know that who is responsible for providing all these civic facilities to inhabitants, and these are the local governments. And somehow in Pakistan, these local governments are not fully empowered, though they exist, but they lack the power. This is not as efficient or the functional institute anymore as it was in the past. And what happens then is when the issues of these issues, civic issues, doesn't resolve on the local level, people see towards the provincial and the federal governments, and somehow it create more ambiguities in the terms of their political views. And they think maybe this is the leadership is responsible for all their miseries, the problems, and suddenly they just relate their miseries in a global context, because there's a lot of narrative available online, in the mosque, in madrasas, at home. They think these rulers, the power elites, are corrupt and they are puppets of the West. And then the issue of the one of sewerage issue, suddenly they link with big conspiracy theory, with the corruption, with the power elites mindset. They think they are responsible. So in that context, I think a new political culture and functional local bodies are very essential. So these are the evidences. Maybe in Karachi, situation is different, in Islamabad or in Lahore, but once you go in the Turbat University in Balochistan, you go to Quetta, Balochistan University, or in Sawat, or in Peshawar, or South Punjab, or Northern Sindh. So you will find that how the people relate their small issues with the very broader global politics or the political landscape.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Amir Rana sir, there are two questions from one of the participants, Muhammad Ali. First question is, if youth are mistaken in making government responsible for all the things happening today in our society, then who is responsible for the state of affairs we are in? And second question is, for more than last 70 years, when we keep seeing a decline in our approximately all aspects of life, what alternative do you think we could have to democracy, as democracy is failing according to thinkers like Noam Chomsky?
Yeah, these are the very interesting observation, and first about to whom to blame. Of course, the state is one of the institution of this, the nation. Executive is one of the important institution of the state, and usually people look towards the state for all their issues and the problems. But the issue is that this is quite dichotomous phenomenon is going on. One side, the society, and think they have little to do in terms of developing their societies or to build pressures on the governments. And all the time they criticize and they look towards the state. But we know that how the state and societies work together. State is responsible for weakening the civil society here, and this is another cause. But nobody stop the society or the youth to form or to make their vices more effective. They doesn't need sometimes the formal institutions. Maybe now they have the more avenues for expressing themselves, unless they will not ask, demand, pressurize the states, they may not act as according to the wishes of the masses. And this is, we call, this whole process is called, whatever, when you demand, when you develop the relationship with the state institutions, this process is called politics. But the problem is that there's two actors who made the word politics dirty. They made all this political discourse very ugly. And we know that they are somehow the custodian of our ideological narratives and the custodian of our nationalism in Pakistan. Unless you will not be active, functional, you cannot develop the better understanding of your issues. You cannot develop the better relationship with the states. And this is the very, I think in many contexts, this is not appreciate this attitude that you all the time blame and you do yourself for nothing. State and societies work together. We can start from a very small example that we know that how important is our environment is, but what we are contributing for making our surroundings and environment clean, and how much we are contributing, creating all these environmental hazards in our country. So this is a civic sense the campuses can promote, and the students should consider the politics as one of the important function of their life and function of the societies, not a sin. This is not a sin, and this is very important. In the absence of the political discourse, the critical, the toxic narrative comes in and they took over these spaces. And this is also linked with the issue of the democracy. The democracy is I think the system which is so far considered one of the best evolved systems, but this may not be perfect. So it has its many manifestations, but more important is that the democracy gives you the two rights. It gave you the rights to ask to whom you choose, are those who rule, that we have given you the revenue, the taxes, that how you collected transparently and how you spent. So this is the one top important function of the democracy we have to be focused more on. And secondly, is allow you to evolve, to criticize, to appreciate the diversities of your societies or the human beings. So these are the two important functions. Rest is all the philosophical debates which is on the democracy is going on. And if you want that in that intellectual discourse, you want to be part of it. So you have to be go and you have to be study and see that how this debate is taking place. And this intellectual debate is not endorsing and not endorsing that what is the situation of the politics in Pakistan. So this is the very different domain where this debate is going on. If you are interested, you can find that how the democracies are changing themselves. In some societies, the democracy found the much space, and in some democracies, the spaces for the civil society, the rights are shrinking. So this is whole the very intellectual discourse you have to be in. But this is not as simple. Sometimes we see, okay, Noam Chomsky say that, and we can simply apply or justify all the wrongdoings here in Pakistan.
Okay, thank you, Amir Saab. A very wonderful and comprehensive presentation, and you have nicely touched upon the very sensitive issue, particularly related to the backbone of our society, the youth. So with that, I just add one comment, as you have said that the democracies are changing, and this is very much true. Look at what happened in the United States in the last administration and what is happening in India. So they are now termed as a struggling democracy. They are not, any more stable democracies. So with that, I thank you, Amir Rana Saab, for your presentation. So with that, we are moving to our second speaker of the day, Rana Saifullah Hassan, who will be speaking on justice for resilient communities, evaluating Pakistan's criminal justice system against violent extremism. Rana Saifullah Hassan is our chapter member from Sindh, and he is presently a civil judge and judicial magistrate based in Thatta. Prior to his appointment in the judicial services in the year 2018, he remained an active member of Karachi Bar Association and Sindh Bar Council. Rana is currently enrolled as a PhD candidate in the Department of International Relations, University of Karachi. He is a visiting faculty at the Zabist and Bahria University. He has presented research papers and addressed at different national and international forums and conferences on law and justice held in Beijing, London, Istanbul, Copenhagen, Trieste, Lugano, etc., etc. He also holds the honor to present his research paper on delay, reduction, and cost of litigation before Honorable Chief Justice, Mr. Asif Saeed Khosa Saab, in the 8th Judicial Conference held in Islamabad. Rana's area of interest is criminal justice system and legislative framework on countering violent extremism for resilient communities. So over to Rana Saiful Hassan.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very clearly.
Thank you very much, sir. Glad to hear you. And now can you see me?
Yes, certainly we can see you, Rana Sahab.
Yeah. Perfect. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shafqa, Dr. Naeem, all the respected participants. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. With the name of Allah, the most merciful and the most gracious. Very good morning and assalamu alaikum to all of you. First of all, it has SDPI Sindh chapter learned a lot and still learning a lot, and alhamdulillah journey of this learning and education goes on with SDPI and Dr. Chafkat and his team. So once you, let me share my screen and we will begin with the presentation. Just a second. All right. Yes. Is my screen visible to all of you?
Yes.
Right. So I will be discussing and I will be touching upon one of the most significant and important topics when it comes to the criminal justice system related to violent extremism. When we talk about terrorism, we do have anti-terrorism courts, but the significance of anti-terrorism courts is yet to be ascertained. Similarly, the criminal justice system standing on the three important pillars: investigation, prosecution, and judicial system. It is very important to understand the dynamics of the entire criminal justice system, because this is the only way the deterrence is created in the society. Unfortunately, we do not have the right systems for the right. Yet we are working a lot against violent extremism with respect to the criminal justice system for the resilient communities. Because I will be talking about Hindu community, I'll be talking about Christian community, and I will also be talking about the Muslim community, because violent extremism is something that we all are affected from. So the study evaluates Pakistan criminal justice system against violent extremism and formulates policy recommendations for the rule of law and dispensing justice to a resilient community. This involves recognizing the role of investigation, prosecution, security to witness. This is very important to provide security to witness, because witness come to court without the proper security. That is why perpetrators in the cases of the violent extremism, they are equipped. I think that's position down and remain number 126 countries when we talk about criminal justice. When we talk about and deal extremism through effective system, unfortunately, right, the dynamics are not in the right place.
जी
Result.
हेलो
Low.
जी राणा साहब, आपकी आवाज बहुत ज्यादा डिस्टॉर्शन है. हेलो.
Geez, Dr. Saab, can you hear me?
Ji, we can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. So I was discussing that the low conviction rates in anti-terrorism courts itself speak of the performance of investigation and prosecution. Unfortunately, so far, the criminal justice system of Pakistan has yet to identify and create a distinction between terrorism and extremism. 80% of the respondents think that extremism is same as terrorism, and that is why we deal the cases of extremism under the terrorism courts. And there is no difference between the two. However, and from the international studies and from the phenomenon and from my experience, I personally believe studies think that extremism is a different phenomena altogether from the terrorism. And you cannot deal both of these things from the one stroke. All right. With respect to the cases of the violent extremism, it is unfortunate that the foundation of motion is incapable to understand the scheme of the person who lodges the FIR in the police station is the head motor. He is the grade 5 officer, and how can you expect him to understand the scheme behind the jurisprudence laid by the Justice Asif Said Khosasab and what the law says and what exactly is the extremism is? His one touch of 780A, Section 7 of the Anti-Terrorism Act, entirely changes the complexion of the case. Now, this is very important to understand. A person who lodges the FIR is the same who does that for a robbery, and a person is the same who lodges the FIR for the incidents of the violent extremism. Now, this is the first very important thing. In many such cases, accused persons are not even nominated correctly in FIR. For example, in case of mob attacking any place of worship, FIR is lodged against a few identified as well as multiple unknown persons. Now, it is up to the police and to the feudal lords in that particular area to nominate as many people as they want, to nominate someone with their own personal grudge in the cases of the extremism. Resultantly, due to lack of evidence, eventually they all find acquittal. And there is no such conviction in these cases. Prosecution has many times come under fire for its performance. Prosecution is also blamed for being politicized, since our prosecutors, special prosecutors, they all are appointed through government of Sindh, and they all are appointed through a process which involves a political involvement in all these things. You cannot expect those prosecutors to go against someone having a place in any political society and any political party. So for that matter, unfortunately, apoliticized. When we talk about judicial system, it also needs to be scrutinized. These are the basically research questions that the research have followed, that how effective is the role of the investigation and prosecution in the cases of violent extremism? What procedural and statutory laws are followed to try cases of violent extremism? We do not have any substantial law against violent extremism through anti-terrorism that by for any must have any political, sectarian or religious motive. Now, when we talk about extremism, why I say that extremism is totally and absolutely a different phenomena, because extremism is not confined to sectarian, religious and political motives. Sectarian can be cultural. And I was discussing this thing with Dr. Shafka that extremism can be linguistic. So extremism is about a phenomena, and you cannot deal with extremism with just a single law of a land. And then what challenges the witnesses, victims and their families face in the court of law, and what are the causes of high acquittal in the cases of violent extremism, and etc. I have already discussed the rule of law project. Okay, study conducted by USIP, United States Institute of Peace, have consequently the creation of 54. Numerous amendments have come, but the conviction rate has never increased, and the reason why, the lack of evidence and benefit of doubt. Now, what exactly is benefit? The defense counsel acquitted from the charges of even terrorism. Now, where the investigation and prosecution is already flawed and politicized, and I don't want to say that is correct, that to some extent corrupt as well. How would you expect persons? Resultantly, what happened back in 2014, less than 10% of conviction. Then in the year 2020, let's not go back, fit terror suspects who were convicted by the military courts and ordered their release. And the bench was comprised of the Chief Justice Waqar Ahmed Said Sahab, may God rest his, may Allah rest his soul in peace, and Justice Muhammad Naeem Anwar. They set aside the conviction orders after hearing 300 plus cases of terror suspects convicted by the military courts. Military courts has sentenced them life imprisonment and death sentences without even affording them a right of hearing, which was the violation of the Article 10A of the Constitution of Pakistan. Another occasion, 20 people of the part of a lynch move burned like a Christian couple that had been falsely accused of blasphemy in 2014. Again, keep on acquitting the accused persons in society, and the people start blaming the court for that. But unfortunately, as a matter of fact, the case is brought in the court by the prosecution after the investigation. So if there is any lack of evidence, the courts cannot do anything. Untrained, the prosecution is untrained to carry forward. Okay, major causes other than poor prosecution in Pakistan are the absence of professional autonomy, poor training, lack of access to basic data, and so many things, as the study suggested in the literature review. The methodology of this research used in the study is purely qualitative, and responses are collected through interviews of important stakeholders, including senior police officer, academicians, researchers on law and justice, practicing advocates of the anti-terrorism courts, judges of the Honorable High Courts, and a judge of the Honorable Supreme Court of Pakistan. Presidents of High Court, Bar, senior journalists, and Secretary Law and Justice Commission of Pakistan. Now, first of all, and most important finding is that the investigation and the prosecution, they do not have any accountability at all. For example, their performance should be analyzed. There is no substantial evidence in the court for trial. If the prosecution investigation think that this case is not fit for trial, the case should be disposed of at the very level of investigation. Court will look into the documents, and if they accuse, no matter how heinous the crime is, because we in the court, we do not see how heinous the crime is, we see the evidence, if the evidence is sufficient to give conviction to someone. But unfortunately, one doubt, the benefit of a single doubt is given to the accused person, and because of that, there is a high rate of acquittal, places of religious worship and practices, forced conversion, etc. In these cases, unfortunately, neither our investigation nor our prosecution, and let's be very true, nor even our learned judges, even they are not sensitized to handle and deal with such cases because of the mob pressure, the pressure of the feudal lords. And when the case is taken to the court of law, the entire complexion of the case is changed. I was talking to one of my fellow judge. He's in the anti-terrorism court, and he was telling me that Ranzab, it is very difficult to hear the cases of the violent extremism because we do face pressure from the mob. And we are rather, at times, we fly to some other countries on vacations and we take holidays at times because we just don't want to, do the hearing of such cases. And that involves extremism and religious extremism especially. So this is all happening. Then one of the respondents was of a view that inclusion of military courts in our criminal justice was an open admission by the parliament through amendment in the constitution that our courts are not effective against terrorism, neither in handing over convictions to hardened criminals, nor putting them on trial. Well, the result was even worse in the form of more than 200 judgments of the military courts being set aside by the Peshawar High Court on account of either extrajudicial confessions and confessions after a period of 5 and 6 months in detention. Now imagine a person is detained in the custody of police and other law enforcement agencies, and then he was made to confess his crime, and that too before the investigation officer. So any confession which is recorded not by the magistrate is called extrajudicial confession and holds no evidentiary value. And because of these procedural defects, in the cases of the violent extremism and terrorism, the hardened criminals, they even get away with their crime. And that is the most painful part for me as a student of law and as a researcher on violent extremism. Then corruption is also evident in the prosecution and the investigation. Witness Protection Act, we do have this act, we do have the laws being followed in protected for 6 months and for years when the trial is not concluded within the span of time within which the witness can be practically given a protection. If a trial of a case is extended to the period of 2 years and 3 years, how do you expect the court system and the law enforcement agencies to give protection to any witness for this long period of time? Then one more suggestion and one more recommendation in this regard is the term benefit of doubt. In our courts, we say that you may hang, you should not hang even a single person who has done anything, giving a benefit of doubt, right? So the benefit of doubt is a very subjective term, and it should be scrutinized, that who should be given the benefit of doubt and who should not be given the benefit of doubt. Then one more thing, and very interesting thing, the law says and that the accused is a favorite child of law, is a blue-eyed child of law. If we say so, what about the victim? I say that if accused is a blue-eyed child of law, then victim is an ignored child of law, unfortunately, because this is what the reality says. Okay. Another most important thing is that in many cases, it is observed that since the cases attracting sections of Anti-Terrorism Act, compounded by the compromise, by way of compromise, the complainant or witness have started a practice of retracting from their statement. You say one thing in FIR, and then you resultant. Then half fried cases and full fried cases. In half fried cases, there's only a gunshot on the leg or in the arm, where the life of a person is not taken by the law enforcement agencies. But most of the times, in the full fried cases, the entire person is shot dead. That's an important aspect. And that has to do with extremism, but this is very important, that locus standi is a term we use for giving a right to someone to file a case. The law says that only a legal heir can file a case in which an extremism is involved. And even if the state is party, even if a police is party, and the court has given a verdict against the complainant, it is up to the complainant to file an appeal. Now, in the cases of violent extremism, in case a police is party, a state is party, the state might not want to contest the case in appeal. So this right should be given to the civil society, because if the case is disposed of at the level of the sessions trial and at the level of the High Court, and if the state does not want to file an appeal in the Honorable Supreme Court of Pakistan, at least this right to file an appeal in the Honorable Supreme Court in the highest forum should be given to the civil society or to anybody, because this is something which has affected the entire complexion of our society, the entire fabric of our society, and every one of us is somehow affected from this extremism, because extremism is not something which is violent only. Extremism can be anything, because the definition of the extremism is also not clear. It is also common record that investigation officer at times, they do not even visit the site of his incident, because in the cases of the religious extremism, they do not enter the site of incident because of the mob violence. They're scared for that. And how can you collect the evidence if you're scared of going inside a temple or a church which has been burned? These are the policy recommendations, and I'm just coming to performance appraisal mechanism for every investigation officer, which should be updated on daily basis and monitored on a dashboard, and the same should be available on provincial police website. Against COVID-19, we have NCOC in Islamabad. Why not to have such thing against the cases on violent extremism? And what police is doing, what investigation is doing, how many cases are being registered, what is the fate of the cases? Why not to monitor laws and the fate of the investigation, and then what actually happened in the court of law? So everything needs to be scrutinized. We talk about dealing violent extremism with iron hands, but how can we do that without having a proper system in place? Then similarly, the same procedure is required to be adopted for prosecution services. A prosecutor should be monitored, he should be scrutinized, and same goes for the judges as well. Their judgments is a part of public record and is open to criticism. But even the courts cannot do anything if there is no evidence in the cases. Okay. Investigation officer in the cases of violent extremism should not be below the rank of ASP. You see, like I said, that even in the cases of the robbery or in the cases of a check bounce, the investigation officer is the same as the one in the cases of the violent extremism. So at least ASP, who can actually understand the wisdom and the jurisprudence behind the enactment of any provision in the law, he should be made investigation officer in such cases under the direct supervision of the DIG. Okay. Exclusive and comprehensive training of police, prosecutors, and learned judges of anti-terrorism codes is imperative. Like I said, we have to face it that even our learned judges are not sensitized with these issues. And in the line of the UNODC and best practices in the world, they should be given proper training. There is no exclusive proper training. The interpretation of the term benefit of doubt has to be curtailed and made clear by the courts. It is expected from the honorable courts, if this term is quantified and interpreted, it will buffer the ratio of acquittal at least. In our law, in the Anti-Terrorism Act, it is either acquittal or death sentence. So the court should be given the liberty to at least decide that fine, there is a lack of proper evidence, but yes, this person has done this crime. So 10 years of punishment or 15 years of punishment should be given to him. But the law does not provide for that. So court should be given discretion to impose sentence. All right. Quickly moving onwards. Civil administration can also be included, rather should also be included in the investigation process. And the deputy commissioners and the assistant commissioners, they should also be made part of the investigation process to collect as much evidence as possible. In research, we call data collection. In court system, in criminal justice system, we call evidence collection. So evidence collection is very important. All right. The courts too have to be very importantly analyze the distinction between extremism and an act of terrorism. This will have a significant impact on sentencing. First, court needs to give a conviction, and after convicting someone, courts sentences someone. So if the law does not provide for any significance or any proper certain sentence, the court should be given this discretion for that. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you so much for the time. And thank you so much for the patience hearing. Thank you, sir. Dr. Naeem, over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rana Saiful Hassan, for your presentation. And I can say that you have touched upon very, very sensitive issues related to the judiciary, our criminal justice system, the role of police, investigation, prosecutor, everything you have touched upon. And also the problems faced by the victim in our judicial system. So now the floor is open for QA session. If anybody can ask question, they can type it in the chat box, send it to us, and we can then move to those questions to the speaker. Or you may email us or write your questions later on as well. Okay. There is one question I have got from Ahmad Siddiq. Can you give us some ideas about how the incumbent government can deal with the ideas related to violent extremism? I mean, the role of government in dealing with the issue of violent extremism.
First of all, in my opinion, and my opinion is always refined by Dr. Naeem, in my personal opinion, first of all, what government needs to do, what parliament needs to do is basically to identify between the act of terrorism and act of extremism. The judgment by the Honorable Supreme Court of Pakistan given in the year 2019 by Honorable Justice Retired Asif Saeed Khan Khosa Sahab, even in the last paragraph, he said that the laws relating to the anti-terrorism needs to be clarified and needs to be enacted by the parliament, because it is a responsibility and a job of a parliament to do that. Our parliament has not done anything so far in these things. All the amendments made, even in the wake of the FATF, are not as effective as they should have been. So first of all, what government needs to do is to identify the difference between extremism and terrorism and enact proper laws. And one more thing, and most importantly, that we have a federal law for against terrorism, Anti-Terrorism Act. But when we talk about extremism, and what I have studied during the passage of my research, that extremism is something which changes with the changing dynamics of a region, with the changing dynamics of a society, with the changing dynamics of the provinces as well. So the government also needs to have a separate anti-terror law, anti-extremism law with respect to the provincial parts as well. So the law should be provincial rather than federal for that matter.
Okay. Thank you, Rana Saif, for your presentation. And now we move to the third speaker of the day. And he is Professor Dr. Riaz Ahmed Sheikh Saab. He will be speaking on the role of civil society in countering violent extremism in Pakistan. Professor Sheikh is the Dean of Faculty of Social Sciences and Education at Shahid Zulfikar Ali Bhutto Institute of Science and Technology, Zabis, Karachi. He served as the editor of peer-reviewed international research journal, Journal of Management and Social Sciences from 2007 to 2010, and managing editor of Asia Journal of Global Studies, Osaka, Japan. His several research papers have been published in the journals of international repute. He is the author of 7 books. His field of interest is religious extremism, fundamentalism, and civil-military relationship. One of his research paper, Pakistan's military role in Asian context, has been chosen as an outstanding author contribution award winner at the Literary Network Awards for Excellence 2010 by the Emerald Publishers, United Kingdom. So now I may request Professor Sheikh to deliver his presentation. Ji, sir. जी जी OS साहब, can you help Dr. Sheikh? जी सर, आपकी प्रेजेंटेशन हमने शेयर कर दी, अनम्यूट करें आप, आईडी बताएं किस आईडी से, क्या शेयर के नाम से, अभी अभी कर रहे हैं, याद अहमद किया गया, डॉक्टर याद है
Yes, sir, you can start now. Dr. Reyes, your mic is unmute and now you can start. Yes. जी, Dr. Reyes.
जी अवैस कोई टेक्निकल इशू तो नहीं है, देखें जरा सब के एंड पे।
नहीं आ रही।
नाम अवैस जरा देखिए प्लीज। डॉक्टर रियाज साहब आपकी आवाज नहीं आ रही है।
अवैध साहब अगर देखें आप हेल्प कर दें डॉक्टर रियाज साहब की और
कैन यू हियर मी डॉक्टर नईम, कैन यू हियर मी?
दीजिए अब आ रही है
जी, थैंक यू। कैन यू शेयर माय स्क्रीन?
या नहीं यार ये कौन सी कर रहे हो
जी, डॉक्टर नईम, कैन यू हियर मी नाउ?
Yeah, we can hear you, and please also open your video.
जी, thank you very much. I'm grateful to SPDI and International Relations Department. जी, just wait for a minute as they are arranging some audio system for this purpose. There is some distortion. Dr. Naim, can I continue if there is no distortion in voice? Hello.
Yes, sir, you can start. You are loud and clear, and your screen has already been shared.
Hello, Dr. Naim, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. You can.
Okay, thank you very much for this technical issues involved in this presentation. First of all, I'm grateful to Karachi University IR department along with SPDI for arranging this wonderful conference. As my topic for today's presentation is the role of civil society in countering CVE in Pakistan. First of all, I will say that this problem of CVE was misunderstood or underestimated in this discourse. Can we go to further? Ji. After 9/11, mostly we focus on military solution of all this extremism, terrorism, and interrelated issues. And even globally, and US, when they were leading this war against terrorism, stop it here, please stop. Then ultimately, they initially focus on this issue of military support to resolve this issue. But after a certain time, when there was a realization that this military solution is not the appropriate solution to resolve this issue, then later on during this time, voices emerged that we have to go for some other tactics to resolve this issue. Can you go to next, please? The first voice came in this regard was a researcher from Kashmir, and she was researcher Farah Pandit, and she wrote a wonderful book, How We Win the War. And during this discourse, she highlighted that ultimately we have to involve civil society in this issue to resolve this issue of extremism and terrorism, and military solution will not be the right topic for right path to achieve our goal. And later on, this realization was felt in US and other countries that we have to involve civil society in this course. Can you go to next? And when we talk about the civil society, ultimately civil society, especially when we want to address the issue of terrorism and extremism, then we have to see the definition of civil society according to our own need. And then we say the civil society is a body of civil actors, communities, because ultimately we are focusing community role, community resilience in our conference in last 2 days. Ultimately, community is informal association, and other part of the society, those who have an objective to achieve this concept. And second part is that this is an arena which is beyond family, market, and the state. Means it's market which is purely dependent on economic opportunities, and family which is for your nurture and other development, and the state means controlling all these things. So we say that civil society goes beyond this one. And can you go to next? When we talk about the civil society, then we have to focus on this issue. Okay, what is the significance of civil society when we talk about CEV? Okay, we want to address the issue of CEVs. Ultimately, we have to see on one hand we have a concept of military solution of this issue, and other hand is the human involvement to resolve these issues. And for this purpose, we say we have to see the significance of civil society, and we must realize that civil society has a very critical role in peace building. Civil society has a very critical role in contributing towards transformation, towards process of reformation, and to bring new changes according to the rising emerges. And last point which civil society is normally supposed to do is create an alternative channels for non-violent conflicts transformation. So this is how civil society significance become very important when we talk about CEV. Can you go to next, please? Another point which I want to highlight is civil society has to focus on the ground realities. Civil society has to see what are the ground realities, as my two earlier presenters were speaking about this one, like Rana Saif mentioned how law has to be according to the needs and requirement, and Amir Rana Saab mentioned earlier that we have to see our own realities. So civil society working globally has to see what are the specific and exclusive needs of our society that may be designed and formulated by our own requirements, something else. And last point, which has been a very point of concerns for us as well, that the role of a civil society become very important in weak and fragile state. Weak and fragile, not in economic terms or in military terms, but in the service sector. Okay, how state has been failed to provide, services to their citizens despite deducting their taxes and something else, which Amir Anasa was mentioning earlier. The civil society role become very important, and we have seen in case of Pakistan, when there are a national calamity or something else like 2005 earthquake or in some other cases, some civil societies, NGOs, they started working, but later on it was revealed that some of the NGOs, not all, but some NGOs, they had some militant backgrounds. They had some affiliation with some organization who had some extremist background, then extremist attachment with them. So that's a reason that we have to see in those states where the state has failed to deliver service to their citizens, and ultimately civil society organization, they jump in. But at that time, it becomes very important and pertinent to see whether these civil society organizations, they are propagating extremism through other tools, or they are trying to fulfill just humanity, of course, this purpose. So this is one point which is very much relevant to our situation in Pakistan. Can we go to next, please? If we look to the contribution of civil society, ultimately, as I mentioned, civil society has a very crucial role in preventing and countering the radicalization, which may lead towards terrorism. Ultimately, as Rana was mentioning earlier, we have to make a differences between terrorism and extremism. And ultimate extremism means the radicalization may lead towards terrorism, or it may end into ideological and some discourses which may lead into some other direction. And the one more important contribution of civil society is that it plays very important role in addressing and reducing grievances and whatever the social problem we have in our social structure, the political conditions we have. Ultimately, civil society plays a role of a bridge in this debate. Civil society highlights the issues, like in case of gender biases or ethnic nationalist question, and some religious, marginalization or something else. Ultimately, civil society comes out of their nexus, and they come out with their solutions to redress this issue. So ultimately, civil society has a lot of contribution in this regard. Then we have to realize this one. Can we go to next, please? And ultimately, civil society has a very crucial role in addressing the issue of radicalization, and how from radicalization to terrorism. Civil society has a very important role to play here. Okay, whether you can break this chain where people, they are moving from extremism towards terrorism, or you can divert their energies and something else towards other activities, and then ultimately you can reintegrate them in a society by providing them some opportunities, by providing them some living playing field where they feel that they are not marginalized, but they are the part of the mainstream society in this debate. And when we think civil society can play very important role in stopping this concept of violent extremism. Ultimately, we have to realize that civil society can play very leading role in controlling this issue of violence and extremism in a society. Can we go to next, please? Now, by keeping these global discourses in our mind, when we focus on Pakistan, so then ultimately we have to see what is the state of civil society in Pakistan, and what role these organizations can play in controlling CEV in Pakistan. That is because ultimately we are focusing on Pakistan and Pakistan's issue. So we have to keep these things in the mind. These civil society organizations, we call them NGOs, we call them CSOs, NPOs, and many other organizations. There have been different history of these organizations. One is the conventional things which were going on in a society on the community basis, in informal organizations from centuries and decades. We are a philanthropic organizations working in our country, but in early 90s, these organizations become very strong, visible, and vibrant in Pakistan, because it was the end of the bipolar world, and unipolar world was emerging, where Fukuyama has mentioned that it's the end of the history. And then these liberal organizations, they were coming up with their objectives, with their sense, and with the support of their financiers, donors, and they were talking about new democratic rights, inclusive societies, secularism, and something else. Societies in Pakistani society, these NGOs, they become very important, and they started delivering in our societies as well. They were, rights group organizations, they were other gender-based organizations. But what I feel is that after 2014 onwards, there has been there is a strong feeling within the state corridors that these civil societies should be brought under some strong vigilance and the scrutiny, because sometimes they talk about those issues which ultimately clash with the state narratives. And that's the reason we have been observing this. These civil societies have been under scrutiny, and their working has been somehow become quite cumbersome, and they have to face a lot of things. So this point we should realize at this moment, that the state should not feel that these civil society organizations, those who are working in Pakistan, they are challenging the state, rate of the state, because as I told you earlier, they are the watchdog dogs of civil rights as well. They are the watchdogs of democratic rights as well. So ultimately, whenever they raise any voice, ultimately they raise a voice with this objective, that in Pakistan, a society should be more inclusive society should be more democratic, a society should be more accommodative. So sometimes these narrative which Amir Rana Sahab was mentioning earlier, that in certain provinces, when you talk to youth, the youth have a lot of reservation on this issue. So similarly, these types of issues become very important for this purpose to know about this. Can we go to next, please? And then we talk about these civil society. So here, I must say that the state should realize that these civil societies, they are the front fight warriors, because these civil societies, they are members. They live within their societies. They live within communities. They understand what the changing in a societies are happening. I give you an example. Like in 2008 onwards, when in Liari, Karachi, there was a playing war started on one hand, something else. So the civil society member living in Karachi, they were giving a lot of ultimatums. They were raising a lot of alerts that something wrong is going on in the areas. And now state has to intervene to stop this. Otherwise, it can be a very serious issue in the coming days. So that's my point is these civil society members, those who are living with the communities, they are so much important. They are very much, relevant in this course. They can raise early warning mechanism. Yes, what are the trends in a societies are happening, how youth is being either radicalized, or he's becoming extremist, or he's taking some weapons, or he's going to take some violent tactics. So this has one our society, our state has to realize that civil society can be involved in this discourse and for resolving this type of conflict. My next point, which is very stay there. The point which I want to mention is that these civil societies have an edge as well, because they work with marginalized groups, they promote political participation, they try to address the grievances of the people. Sometimes state and victims, they have a lot of gap between those groups, and sometimes communication lines are not clear and they are not developed as well. These civil society members can act as a bridge in this discourse, and they can ultimately bring these demands, their grievances, and their other issues before the state, so that they can be resolved. And in our society, I feel that state has to give space to these civil societies organizations, so that at least they can maintain and they can restore the lines of communication between the victims and the state, so that they are on the same page. Can you go to next, please? And in this scenario, when I say that civil society can play a very important role in addressing this issue of terrorism and extremism, and we can use them in the process of CEV. So ultimately, we have to see what can the state role, because ultimately state is one of the biggest stakeholder in this debate. Our point of view is that state in this discourse should play the role of facilitator. State should play the role of convener, and they should act as an intellectual partner. Means all data is coming to state. State is the custodian of reports and other secret reports of intelligence agencies and something else. This is the state responsibility to take these civil society organizations into confidence, share whatsoever the relevant information is required for these, so that at least they can be on the same page and they can resolve these issues. So in my view, in case of Pakistan, we have not been able to explore the full potential of civil society in redressing this concept of CEV. For this purpose, my point of view will be academia, the civil society, the professional organizations, and others. These have to be on the same page, so that they can play a role of facilitator in state thing. Like I gave an example. I'm working with Sindh government as far as the curriculum is concerned. So we have been raising this point as a member of a civil society, as a member of the academia, that how we should de-radicalize our school curriculum, how we should focus on school curriculum, which should help us to create a concept of global citizenship, where people should not be using the word syllabus should not be the propagator of hate. Similarly, we should not, identity creation is our very much important point in this debate. We have to see whether our curriculum and other things, they are creating a negative identity creation, or they are creating an identity which is based on the global human practices. Similarly, I tell you, okay, as a member of the civil society, we have been raising these issues. We have to focus on the Madrasa systems, how these Madrasa systems, they've been propagating certain things. Civil society role becomes very important in this scenario. Civil society should negotiate and bargain on this issue. Similarly, what we are teaching the mainstream schools, at that time, civil society role become very important. Okay, they can take this role forward. So my submission is that civil society is a very important role, but we have not fully, used the potential of civil society to address this issue. And we have to take civil society as a essential partner to resolve this issue, and until we have this type of understanding, then problem will not be fully resolved. Thank you very much, Dr. Naeem. Dr. May I have concluded?
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Riaz, for your presentation. There are two questions for you. One is how personal enmities and the practice of taking revenge are playing their role in militancy and extremism in Pakistan. Second question is how civil society can play its role in countering violent extremism if a person does not engage in any organization. What is the worth of an individual in countering violent extremism? How can he or she play a role in the society?
Thank you very much. As far as the first question is concerned regarding your personal enmity or your personal conflict with larger group, ultimately these issues can be resolved through involving institutions like Rana was mentioning. Ultimately, judiciary is there. If you have some personal disputes on certain issue, you have a state institutions with you, like you have a law enforcement agencies, you have a police, you have a judiciary and something else. You can address your personal issues by involving those institutions. That is one issue. As far as and in certain societies, that I tell you, because ultimately when we talk about these extremist trends or something else, so we have in Pakistan, we have a urban setting where your formal institutions work, but along with this, we have some areas where urban the formal institutions then they don't work, and then people they involve jargas and people they involve some other thing. The issue is that the personal issue should be. I give an example in case of Sawat. After 1969, when this the traditional judicial system in Sawat was banned and ultimately new things started emerging, people failed to get relief from certain institutions, and ultimately the problem become very much burning. And same is we are forecasting in case of FATA as well, where ultimately FATA has been merged in KP, but along with this still some state institutions have not fully functional there. So the personal issue has to be resolved through proper institutional arrangement, and for this purpose institutional arrangement should be strengthened. as for the second point is concerned, a person who is not part of any civil society or the part of any formal organization, how he can contribute in this debate. Yes, a person can contribute in any shape. If you are in any position, the one has to be a judge of his own conscience, because he has to see what type of human people within your society, their behavior. The individual has a very important role to play, because Karl Marx said that the individual cannot play a very significant role, but individual can play very significant role if individual is thinking on the collective term. So there is a political consciousness within the individuals, and individuals have to think within society. He has not to compromise for his own interest, but he has to come out for the collective benefit. So individual can play an important role while being a part of any civil society organization, and individual can play without part of any civil society as well.
Thank you, Dr. Riaz Sheikh, for your wonderful presentation, particularly touching upon the role of civil society, which has been considered as which has a very negative perception, particularly in our society. And definitely it has a very important role to play for the countering of violent extremism in Pakistani society. So with that, I would like to invite another presenter, who is Dr. Hernando Zuleta. He will be speaking on Colombian approach and policy framework to encounter violent extremism. Dr. Zuleta is a full professor in economics at University de Los Andes. He was appointed as a director of the Center for Studies on Safety and Drugs of the Faculty of Economics of the university for 2 years, starting from April 1st, 2016. And by the end of 2017, he was appointed as a director of the Center for Studies on Economic Development of the Faculty of Economics of the University de Los Andes. Zuleta has compiled a book about economics and security in Colombia after the peace agreement, and his forthcoming book is on illicit crops and violence in Colombia. He holds a PhD from Fabra University and master's degree in economics from the University de Los Andes. And in the past, he worked for ITAM University in Mexico, University del Rosario in Colombia, Brown University in the United States of America, and American University in Bulgaria. So over to Dr. Zuleta.
Thank you very much. Can I share my screen? Let me see.
Yeah, please.
Great. Do you see my screen? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So again, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation and for these wonderful presentations. So here I'm going to begin with an overview of the current situation in Colombia, pointing out that we are in a kind of a tipping point. So let me jump into the main topic. So I'm going to make a short story since the beginning of the century. The first thing to highlight is a very important decrease in poverty. Colombia used to have poverty rates of 50% of the population, and from 2000 to 2018, it went to 27%. Still a high level of poverty, but a huge decrease. And of course, this decrease in poverty created a middle class. However, this is a fragile middle class because these families these households are above the poverty line, but with a very tiny margin. Now, even though we have this huge gain in poverty, in reducing poverty, employment informality is huge. It depends on how you measure it, but it's around 50%. It means that only 50% of the labor force has formal contracts and some labor protection. This regarding poverty. Now, Colombia also has a long tradition of violent movements. However, for more than 15 years, the homicide rate has been decreasing. Again, from 70 deaths for, let's say, the homicide rate 4,000 inhabitants went from 70 in the first years of the century to 25 in 2019. And this huge decrease is related to the agreement between the government and FARC, the biggest guerrilla group in Colombia. This agreement began to be negotiated in 2013, and during the negotiations, the intensity of the conflict starts going down, and when the agreement was signed, the feeling of the people was that violence was almost over. However, okay, let me move. So, however, these are two very good news. However, together with these two good news, there was, or there is, a brutal political polarization. To begin with, during the agreement, the right-wing party called Centro Democrático was completely against negotiations with FARC. The main mantra was, no, we shouldn't be negotiating with terrorists. So when the agreement was signed, the government called for a referendum. People had to answer yes or no regarding the implementation of the agreement. And Centro Democrático was campaigning against the agreement. And at the end of the day, by a small majority, the no, meaning not to the agreement, won the referendum. This was a big shock for the government, a big shock for Las FARC, and then the government has to sit down with Centro Democrático and try to negotiate some modifications to the agreement, and then pass the agreement through the Congress. This is what happened, and then the government began to implement the agreement. However, many people in Centro Democrático said, no, this agreement is not legitimate. So this polarization was huge, and then the campaign for the new elections for president came. The candidate of the left, a former guerrilla, not Las FARC guerrilla, but a former guerrilla, was seen as a radical by the establishment. And then the other strong candidate was the candidate of Centro Democrático. Of course, the tension, the political tension was huge. Centro Democrático wins, and during the campaign, several people of Centro Democrático claimed they were not going to implement the agreement. Now, this new president said, no, we are going to implement the agreement, but the seed of the doubt was there, and the implementation has been, let's say, is being slow and not very effective. Second, Las FARC during many years had like half of the crop of the coca crops in Colombia. Let's say we're controlling these crops, and this connection, FARC drug dealing, remains strong after the end of the agreement. There was an investigation. It seems that some of these former guerrillas of FARC were still in the business after all this scandal. They created dissidence movement, and they keep calling it Las FARC. Now, in these places where they grow coca, in some of these places, Las FARC left, so a new violent tension between the population and possible controllers of coca crops degenerated in resurface of violence. In this environment of tension, political left-wing political parties, workers' unions, teachers, etc., some indigenous organizations, and other groups organize a national strike. So, and the national strike, in principle, is a standard way of demonstrating. However, it had characteristics of terrorism, let's say of low intensity terrorism, like destroying infrastructure, destroying buses, attacking policemen, etc. Okay, so this was the environment before COVID-19. Now, then the pandemic attacks the country. The pandemic had huge economic effects in Colombia. First, regarding jobs, around 6 million jobs were destroyed. The unemployment rate went from 13% to increased by 13 percentage points between 2019 and 2020. And of course, all these negative effects were stronger for poor and these fragile middle class I was talking about before. This is okay. In these circumstances, where let's say we have this political tension before the pandemic, we have this drug dealing struggle before the pandemic. Then the pandemic comes and generates an economic massacre. Almost all these people who went out of poverty in the last 18 years went back to poverty. Then, in these circumstances, a new wave of protests arrived. And of course, the organizers of the national strike capitalized all the discontent. So this is the main point of this presentation. What were the policy responses, and how are they related to what really happened, and if are they useful or not? So the first policy response were the quarantines. And now, of course, after several months, it seems that the quarantines arrived too soon, when the level of contagion was small. Nobody was dying, and then we began with quarantines. The second problem was it was too general. Everyone must stay home. And too formal. And what I mean with too formal, if I am a professor at a university, I can work in the way I'm working right now. But if I am an informal worker, I don't have this possibility. Either I go out of my house or I cannot work. So these quarantines, again, too soon, and had heterogeneous effects for different type of workers. The second policy was financial aid. So money transfers to poor population. And the question was too little? Let's say if the idea was to convince people or to allow people to stay home, these people who cannot, they use the statistics about poverty. But in the middle of this shock, many of the people in the middle class went from middle class to poverty, and they were as well desperate. Maybe the best way was to have something more general. Then the third policy was employment subsidies. So for these firms which keep the jobs, some financial aid as well. But this policy came a little bit too late. So the destruction of formal jobs was already big. Maybe it was a little bit too little as well. Why? Because there was a huge uncertainty, and some firms just couldn't survive. And again, too formal. What I mean with too formal, these subsidies only came to formal firms, of course. The fourth policy response was a proposal for a tax reform. What was the idea? To have enough revenue to pay for the debt we were for the debt to finance this expenditure, and also to make all these programs permanent. However, people did not receive this reform in a good way. They thought it was too big. The government didn't discuss enough, and this reform was the first reason to go out and protest against the government again. And then, once the people go out to protest, protests were massive and were violent as well. I talked to you about the destruction of infrastructure, attacks to police. Now, the response was a mix of repression, dialogue, and inaction. Now, what are the policy options here? And let me, I'm borrowing this concept by Chimamanda Ngozi, is don't even think about a single story. But because here in these protests, we have people who want to overthrow the government. We have people who want to generate chaos and destabilize the country in the style of other South American countries like Venezuela or Argentina, where the political equilibrium just was broken by the protests. Some people are looking for the emergence of authority-free zones. I talk about the problem of narco traffic, and indeed, with these protests, some places, some of the country began places with no authority, or with the authority of illegal gangs. And some people are expressing discontent. And these are 4 types of protest in one big chaos. So the main question now is how to build legitimacy and confidence in this chaos. I think I may be running out of time, so I will stop here and open the floor to questions.
Thank you, Dr. Zuleta, for your presentation. I think your presentation has raised several questions. Here, I'm in the region, the country Colombia, and the region is very little known region to Pakistanis, most of the Pakistanis. So the important aspect which you have touched upon, the role of Colombian government and the groups in the country, and the way the resilient society could be created. So I'm just waiting for questions from the audience, and so far we have received no question, but I can announce that anybody can put up their questions, and we can forward your questions to the speaker, Dr. Zuleta. So anyhow, wonderful experience to have you here, and I hope in future we'll continue this sort of interaction. There is one question I have received from Faik Hassan, who is the PhD candidate at the International Relations Department. His question is related to the conspiracy theories. He says that conspiracy theories have played a negative role, and the inclusion of propaganda into the matter has further aggravated the situation, the blame game, fixing of responsibility, etc. So his question is how Cuba has tackled the situation.
Oh my God, this is
sorry, Colombia. I mean, I don't know whether he has mixed up Cuba or Colombia, but how have you or your country has tackled this situation related to the conspiracy theory?
Okay, so the first the fast answer is badly, but this is a very important question, because when the so one of the stories going on when the national strike was called was that the actual president was not a legitimate president, because there was money of drug dealers in his campaign, which was not proven, which is not. It's difficult to believe, because this guy has this idea of prosecuting narco trafficking in every ways. So this was there. Then when the strikes began, social media was full of videos and images of policemen violating human rights of the protesters. So this wave of, let's say, there was a strategic way to communicate that this government was abusing of power, was repressing, and the government and the pro-establishment people didn't react in a timely manner. So many people around the world they were thinking that Colombia was kind of a dictatorship and with brutality, etc. Now we know that some of the protests end up with the destruction of streets, bus stations. They killed 19 policemen. So, of course, there was brutality. The government is not perfect, but the way to communicate what was happening had a huge effect, not only on the way in which Colombians experienced the situations, but also for the diplomatic relations of Colombia. I think the government must learn about the situation. But again, I'm not an expert in social media. I think we should invest in this way of communicating.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Zuleta, for your presentation and also answering the very tricky question. So let's move to another speaker of the day, who is Dr. Kathleen Bochtman. She will be speaking on European approach to countering violent extremism and the German policy framework. Let me say here one thing, that we have selected these speakers to give a comparative analysis of various countries on the issue of countering violent extremism. So Dr. Kathleen, she is the professor at the Department of Political Systems and Comparative Politics. She is teaching and researching at the Department of Political Systems and Comparative Politics at Dresden, where she received her PhD in the year 2017. She studied political science, communication science, and philosophy in Dresden, with short fellowships in the United States and Pakistan. Her work and research is focused on state stability, evolutionary institutional research, and comparative systems, in particular research into parliamentarianism. So over to Dr. Kathleen Bochtman, please.
Thank you very much. I'll share my presentation. There it is. Okay, I hope everybody can see it. Yes, thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the German policy framework looks like. We don't have too much time, so I have to concentrate on the main outline of the framework, and I also concentrate on Germany because the European approach is a very broad approach. So Germany is a cosmopolitan country that provides a diverse society with a space and the opportunity to develop, and the diversity of the country is a source of social cohesion and cultural wealth. And the acceptance and respect are essential conditions for a peaceful coexistence. And the basic law, which is our foundation, makes the values of equality, human dignity, and freedom the foundation of the organization of our state. And among them, Article 3, which is one of the main articles of our constitution, of the basic law, forbids discrimination on the basis of religious, political beliefs, gender, racial discrimination, and unequal treatment regarding any actual or imagined differences. And to protect people from racism, from discrimination is an objective that is of very outstanding significance for the federal government and for the politics of Germany and Europe as well. And to make democracy able to defend itself, it must be well fortified through the foundation, through the basic law, and also work against attacks on democracy, and attacks on freedom, and attacks on the rule of law. And this is where the prevention of extremism comes into play. And we have several phenomena that are of particular importance when we look at political extremism and actions that are taken within our policy framework. And the most important one is right-wing extremism. Most people are well aware of Nazi Germany's past. So right-wing extremism has always played the major role in extremism prevention. It covers measures that protect the values of our basic law and of the constitutional state, and to also safeguard the security of the citizens. And we have seen various attacks on German society through right-wing extremism. We recently, until a couple of years ago, we had a 10-year series of terrorist attacks, killings of migrant people, mostly by a right-wing terrorist cell called the National Socialist Underground, about 5 people who did a series of murders, killing 2,000 people. And this showed the extremes of violence that the right wing in Germany is prepared to use. And we had reports by the German government that refers to the fact that more than half of all right-wing extremists in Germany are prepared to be violent. So that's a big danger. And we also had a marked increase in right-wing motivated acts of violence, which are about 20,000 acts of violence a year in Germany. And the increase has happened in the last 5 to 6 years, particularly in the face of the refugee situation that started in 2014 and 15, and also then the associated neighborhood conflicts with the refugee situation, which had protest movements, assaults, and attacks on asylum seekers in Germany and also in Europe. But also violence and terrorism against politicians who are seen in favor of migration have happened. And what we also see is that some elements of right-wing and racist ideologies are also widespread throughout society. We also have left-wing extremism, which is also a focus of preventive work. And the need for this can also be seen in government reports. We have a total number of criminal activities in the left-wing area of about 5,500 each year. And these criminal activities are mainly directed against the police, against emergency services, and in many cases, left-wing violence is also used in left and right-wing conflicts in the street, particularly for soccer matches where there's right-wing fans of soccer teams and left-wing fans, and also in the context of big demonstration on political issues. And it is the task of the law enforcement agencies to take actions against those because, of course, militancy and violence have no place in a democracy, but also for more broader preventive measures in that area. The problem with left-wing extremism is that it exists with different ideological focuses. Some aim to overcome the existing liberal democratic order and society and to replace it with either a communist socialist or an anarchist system. but it's a very diverse, heterogeneous group. Then we work in Germany on the prevention of Islamic radicalization, which has been talked about here today a lot. I keep it rather short, but I want to stress that it's also a big issue here in Germany. We have measures to prevent and block Islamic radicalization in which religion is misused for anti-democratic purposes. And this tendency is to be countered even before it reaches the state of radicalization. And what we see is that Islamic and terrorist groups are canvassing intensely and sometimes highly professionally for supporters in Europe and in Germany. And they are particularly successful with young, unstable personalities, especially young men. And we've seen since 2013 that young people from Germany and Europe have been increasingly traveling towards Syria and Iraq to become fighters with Islamic terrorist groups. And there's also the great and real danger that these people, having become more strongly radicalized abroad, then return to Germany and Europe and join networks of like-minded Islamist terrorists. And please don't forget that the terrorists of the 9/11 attacks in the United States used to live in Germany and were students at German universities before they committed those acts. Another area or phenomena of prevention that we have is Islamophobia, or hatred of Muslims, as a rejection of the religion Islam because of an actual or ascribed adherence to the religion. And therefore, we consider it necessary to support the civil resolution of conflicts in which the factors of culture, ethnicity, or religion play a part or are a contributing factor, where Islam combined with, for example, racism is seen as something that extremist forces work against. There's also anti-Semitism, ranging from prejudice against Judaism and anti-Semitic agitation, which has risen through the COVID situation, to attacks of people of Jewish faith and attacks on synagogues. That's another important development that we are keeping an eye on, because those have risen a lot in the last 3 years. Wounded them. They show that we need to work on preventing those forms of anti-Semitism. Then we have another era, anti-Ziganism, or hostility towards Sinti and Roma people who mostly come from Eastern Europe. And there we have dissemination of prejudice and hatred, which is handed down historically. Anti-Ziganism has played a role in Europe for centuries, but also we have violent assaults on those groups. And the aim is to critically analyze anti-Ziganism and to provide the general public with information on those minorities and to present the lives of Sinti and Roma people in Europe and in Germany, so that we can develop models for better participation in civil society. The last phenomenon that extremist prevention works on is homophobia and transphobia, which are reflected in the stigmatization and the rejection of lesbians, gay, bisexual, trans, and intergender people. And those are relevant social phenomena, and it is important for society and the government to support the acceptance of same-sex relationships and to break down prejudice, hostility towards LGBTI people, and to take a stance against discrimination and violence on the basis of sex, gender, or sexual identity or sexual orientation. And what we have is that Germany tries to combine the efforts at several levels, the political level, the society or the practical level, and also the research level and also the different levels of state, local authorities, regional, federal, and the international level. And for that, we have an interministerial working group, which is a group that has representatives from all the areas, and they provide reports every couple of years on the status of extremist prevention, and they systematically record the different activities of the departments working on the prevention of extremism and the associated promotion of democracy and participation in civil society. And what we've developed in that focus, what our policy framework looks like, can be summed up in 3 major parts that I'm going to talk about a little bit. The first major pillar of the German policy framework is that we have a federal agency for civic education. This is something that developed after Nazi Germany's past, and it's pretty unique for all the Western nations to have such an extensive framework. It comes from the history of re-education after the Second World War, where we wanted to get people involved in democracy and learn about democracy. And the task of this federal agency for civic education is to promote an understanding of political issues, to consolidate an awareness of democracy, and to strengthen the willingness to become politically involved. And together with a nationwide network of 16 state agencies, so we have 16 states in Germany called Länder, and they all each have their state agency, their regional center. We have those educational facilities and institutions, and they operate on a non-partisan basis in the discussion of the controversial democratic positions, and they're committed to civic and political education and to strengthen the democratic culture. They have a respectable budget of about 50 million euros each year, and their contribution is mainly to combat the emergence or to combat the consolidation of extremist attitudes and structures through this political education. And at the heart of this work lies the aim of removing the ground for extremist, racist, anti-democratic attitudes before they take roots, and also to offer those citizens who are already involved in civil society specific assistance so that they have the power to counter extremist attitudes more efficiently. And talking about offering assistance to civic society, we have 2 programs that I want to talk about a little bit. 2 main federal programs. One is Live Democracy, active against right-wing extremism, violence and hate. And the other one is Cohesion through Participation. And those 2 programs, along with the services and the measures of the Federal Agency for Civic Education, they are of significance for the prevention of extremist attitudes. And let me show you this program of Live Democracy, what it looks like here in Germany. With the federal program Live Democracy, the Federal Ministry for Family Affairs, Senior Citizens, my son is in my room and he's disturbing me. The Federal Ministry, they are promoting civil participation, and they are promoting democratic behavior at the local, regional, and national level. And they give help to associations and projects and initiatives which are dedicated to promoting democracy and diversity. And this support is provided throughout Germany to local authorities, the Partnerships for Democracy, the regional democracy centers in the federal states, in the Länder, and also structural development of nationwide NGOs, along with pilot projects on selected phenomena of group-related hate in rural areas and for the prevention of radicalization in the areas of right-wing extremism, Islamist extremism, and left-wing militancy. And those new pilot projects have focused on the thematic areas of racism and racist discrimination, along with anti-discrimination and early prevention, starting at the preschool level. And the target groups for federal programs, they include children and young people, their parents, family members, voluntary part-time and full-time youth support workers, multipliers, state and civil society organizations. And they get money through this program for their individual work to support different areas of society and different projects. And some of them are funded for only 3 years, or maybe sometimes also for 18 months, and others are funded for long periods of time. And then we have Cohesion Through Participation, which is a program that supports projects for democratic participation and against extremism, particularly in German rural or structurally weak areas or regions in which extremist tendencies are growing stronger, partly in face of the comparatively weak presence of democratic parties and institutions, which I think is something that Pakistan is also seeing. It provides a pluralist democratic debate in the public arena. And the target group here are full-time and voluntary workers in clubs, in organizations, throughout the region, plus people who are active in civil society and at a local authority level. And they are trained to become what we call democracy advisors, who will increase awareness for the recognition of anti-democratic attitudes. They provide counseling in conflict situations caused by extremism, and they support the development of prevention strategies. So it's a bottom-up grassroots work kind of program, where the projects are picking up the potential that is already present at the local level, in the structures of amateur sports clubs, associations, the volunteer fire services, any volunteer structures, relief organizations, and other civil society partners that are provided funding for those projects to help counter extremism. So what we can see is that the strategic approaches of the federal government of Germany, they range from promoting participation in civil society and strengthening democratic counterforces through preventive education, work with children, with young people, with young adults, parents. Then we have political education or civic education work, the conveying of knowledge and strengthening of the capacity to act amongst specialists, amongst multipliers, and then the provision of counseling services for people who are at risk. And also ultimately, anti-democratic phenomena must also be countered using all the means available for the rule of law and for the constitutional states. And this includes banning of associations that are shown to be extremist, also banning of political parties that are extremist, precise observation of the extremist scene through the security forces, and criminal prosecution of people who have committed a crime. So what you can see in this picture is all the strategic partners that play a role in the policy framework in one way or the other. And what we see is we have 6 main fields of action for our policy framework. And I want to get to an end to show you really quick what those 6 fields of action look like. I already talked a little bit about civic education, intercultural learning, democracy building. So those are the preventive educational services, where we have a broad area of services to interested citizens, events, training measures for teachers, for youth workers. We have a a website with lots of online material for information on politics and others, prepared political education materials for schools and for continuing education for young adults. There's local journalist programs, there are study trips, for example, to Israel, and they have different thematic areas where you can get involved. There's special networks in the civic education field for young people that are supported by the federal agency. And they bring young people with different educational backgrounds together to work on democracy. And also we have programs for historic political education on historic events. Memorial sites concept plays a role, and different measures to provide intercultural learning, social competence, civic dialogue. Then we have those measures for participation in civil society, where we have when we want to provide an active civil society involvement of citizens, and there we provide longer term support to those who are committed to diversity, to democratic values. And we try to support a nationally operating civil society infrastructure through clubs and associations and joint actions against extremism, both through those programs that I talked about, Live Democracy and the Partnerships for Democracy, and also to find, local partners like sports club, which play a major role in civil society, and they are also then an important partner in working with a preventive potential. So we have sports programs where sports and politics are united against right-wing extremism, for example. Then we have the whole area of advice, monitoring, and intervention. So what we have is we subsidize advisory services in supporting victims of extremist measures, in supporting relatives and people involved in politics, and in supporting local communities who face extremist activities. And they give counseling to mayors, to city councils, to churches, to individuals who have faced prejudice, who have faced extremism in one way or the other. In addition, this monitoring and intervention program supports de-radicalization and distancing measures, which are intended to help people give up extremist attitudes and behaviors, especially to give up advocation of violence to implement their objectives. And if we have, crisis situations, especially with right-wing extremism in the public arena, for example, demonstrations or concerts of rock bands which support extremist ideas, or if we have propaganda, the people affected and the people responsible at the local level, they can turn to those mobile counseling teams that provide locally based strategies, help to counter the dominance of those extremist groups. And to make this possible, we have a very network approach of different actors working together, mostly in the field of right-wing extremism, but also increasingly in the field of Islamic extremism, where we have cooperation with Muslim civil society, and we have established counseling centers in the area of Islamic extremism in the big cities where they mostly play a role. And the goal for Germany is to have the same nationwide counseling structure in the area of Islamic extremism as we have in the area of right-wing extremism in the future. Then we have media and internet as a field of action, because the entry and the radicalization path of young people, they are changing. The internet and social media are playing an increasing role. Salafist groups, Islamic terrorist groups, such as the Islamic States, they use the internet specifically and highly professionally for their propaganda and for getting followers. And also racism, hate speech are constant problem in the internet. So we've developed measures to counteract that. In one way, to develop and strengthen media awareness in young people and in adults, protecting children and young people from media content that poses a danger through indexing certain media. And also in this context, Germany and also Europe have established laws that expect companies in the internet sector to not make their platforms available for the dissemination of content that is racist, that glorifies violence. And this means that increasingly we found legal measures that force internet providers to delete or block offensive material and to make criminal prosecution easier. It's not perfect, it's not working very well, but it's working somewhat. The fifth part is research, and this task in this field of action is to reconstruct the backgrounds and the contexts of the genesis of extremist tendencies and to describe pathways into extremism and how we can look at the services offered by civil society and at their effectiveness and how they're working. So there is the collection and the recording of data, the evaluation of programs that is almost always mandatory now for public funding. And we have a fairly broad reporting service for cases of politically and extremist motivated crimes here in Germany, and also then centers that work for the prevention of those activities professionally. So those are academic institutions throughout the country that specifically do research on anti-extremist measures. And the last part is the field of international cooperation, because there are various international partners dedicated to fighting extremism and also terrorism, which is associated with extremist attitudes. So the United Nations with some subdivisions like the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime have anti-extremist programs that Germany is a part of, where the central focus is preventing and combating internationally working terrorist groups, and then the radicalization of followers of those groups. Then there's the Global Anti-Terror Strategy by the United Nations that was adopted in 2006. The EU presented a comprehensive strategy for combating radicalization and recruitment for terrorism in 2009, which is regularly updated with the national governments of Europe. And there's an exchange network for experts, the Radicalization Awareness Network RAN in Europe, and also the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE. They adopted the Charter for Preventing and Combating Terrorism back in 2002. The G7 group and the Council of Europe have done measures where we are part of, and they all try to align their preventive measures somewhat. So to get finished, what do we need to work on? What are the tasks ahead? One major problem of preventing extremism in Germany has been the problem of keeping up with the changing circumstances. You implement funding frameworks, and then the circumstances change. In 2015, we had the refugee situation. Now we are facing extremism in the wake of COVID situation. We're also facing some extremism in the conflicts on climate change. So you always have a several-year lag in the funding of programs that's not keeping up with what's up to date right now. Then we need to further strengthen civil society throughout Germany. What we've seen is that we have lots of measures in the bigger cities and many less measures in the rural areas, and to get a broad coverage, we need to strengthen it throughout the country. Then we have a problem of consolidating successful approaches. So if we have a pilot project that works really well, it's still hard for the organizers of that project to get repeated funding or to get sustainable funding beyond those individual programs that make it really available to have those for decades instead of just a couple of years while we have the public funding. They also need to improve the legal basis for the work, especially in difficult circumstances, like what's the protection for the people doing anti-extremist measures when they themselves are threatened through extremists. And then as in all federal states, we have the problem of federalism, where two states or the federal and the state level or the local level might do things differently and might not collaborate very well. So we need to improve the networking, the collaboration between all the different levels of government to learn from one another, and also to make sure we are not offering the same services several times as competitors. And the last thing that's been difficult is the alignment of the rule of law and the security services and all civil preventive services. You sometimes have a gap where the civil society is not responsible anymore, but security systems has not taken over. So there's this sort of problem here to make sure that what the police, what the security services are doing and what civil society is doing goes hand in hand. So thank you very much for your interest in Germany's policy network policy area on countering radical extremists, and greetings from Germany.
Thanks, Catherine. Wonderful presentation. I know how about
wonderful
Germany.
presentation. Yeah. I must say that it's a great presentation. There are several questions for you, but what I can do, most of the questions have been partly answered related to the young people attracting towards violent extremism and how European governments are dealing with this problem. And what measures Germany has in place to monitor the effectiveness of the countering violent extremism. So one question is related to the post-pandemic extremism. Can we see the reduction in the extremism after the COVID-19 pandemic? That is one question. Second question is the student says you have used the term strategic partners, federal armed forces in your chart, but what would you say about infiltration of neo-Nazis in German army, especially in the light of last July 2020 Defense Ministry officially dismantling a company of the German army's elite special commando forces after several far-right incidents, and how threatening such infiltrations can be in future? So I would like to your response to these two questions.
Yes, yes, sure. Yeah. About the COVID situation, what we've seen is that we've had protests against the lockdowns that were implemented. We had 3 lockdowns, one in March 2020, then one Christmas, New Year's 2021, and then another one in March with the rise of the British variant of the virus. And we've seen public demonstrations and lots of dialogue or also public protest against those measures. There are about 10 to 15% of the population who are active against COVID measures. And they have joined forces with some right-wing extremist groups. They've also joined forces with some anti-pharma industry groups who promote alternative medicine and alternative medical treatments. And they were pretty successful in organizing several big demonstrations with up to 30,000 people in Berlin. Nothing really serious happened. Some, some vaccination centers were vandalized, graffitied, stuff like that. Some people were threatened, of course, but no problematic action has happened. And what we see as the major problem of this joint forces of right-wing groups and COVID anti-COVID groups is that it normalizes right-wing extremist ideologies amongst the society. However, right now we are in a very relaxed COVID situation. We almost have no measures in place anymore, almost no infections. Vaccination is available to everybody who wants it. We actually have the problem that we don't get people vaccinated with the vaccines that we have. So we have more vaccines than people wanting to be vaccinated. So this slowly kills off the protests. About the infiltration of neo-Nazis in the armed forces, that's always been a problem, because if you think about the mindset of people who are attracted to police or army or security services work, they are usually a little bit more hierarchical, authoritarian, violent in their personalities than maybe the average citizens. We do not have a universal draft anymore. We used to have universal draft where all young men had to go to the army for several months. We do not have this. We abolished this a couple of years ago. So right now we only have voluntary army services. And we've had this incident that some neo-Nazi groups have infiltrated the army, and the army is trying to find measures against this in making sure you do not let those people join. They're surveilling it, but it's difficult to know what's inside people's heads. But they are trying to monitor the situation, and people who show to be extremists, they are kicked out of the army.
मेरे ऊपर नीचे 2 वेबिनार आ गए हैं, ठीक है, तो मैं बाद में फोन, अच्छा मैं तुम्हें बाद में फोन करता हूँ फिर, ठीक है?
I think somebody has their mic open.
Yes, carry on, Catherine.
Said so the army is monitoring those situations and trying to kick those people out, and that's I think the only thing they can do. They are being prosecuted if they show some extremist thoughts. So the understanding of our armed forces is that's very much a liberal democratic institution, and any anti-liberal behavior or processes are not allowed, and they try to get rid of those people.
Dr. Naimsa, please unmute yourself.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Kathleen, for your wonderful presentation and answering very critical queries of our students and colleagues. So with that, I can move to our second last speaker of the day, Imtiaz Gul Saab. Sorry to keep you waiting for so long. Imtiaz Gul Saab will be speaking on the role of media in countering violent extremism in Pakistan. He is a renowned journalist, columnist, and author, and currently he's the executive director, CRSS Islamabad, and he has a vast experience of journalism, which spans over 30 years, where he worked for Deutsche Welle, Voice of Germany, Friday Times, CNN TV, and he's the author of various books, including Pakistan, Pivot of Hizb ut-Tahrir's Global Caliphate, Pakistan Before and After Osama bin Laden, sorry, The Most Dangerous Place, Pakistan's Lawless Frontier, Al-Qaeda Connection, Taliban and Terror in the Tribal Areas, and the unholy nexus Pak-Afghan relations under the Taliban. His field of specialization is national politics, border regions, Afghanistan and Indo-Pakistan relations, Kashmir and regional security. So with that, I hand over the screen to Imtiaz Gul Saab. Please.
Okay. Well, first of all, Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon to everybody. I must apologize. You may have overheard some of my speech. It has been a very hectic day today for me. A lot of things happening here at the family front as well as in the office, and hereafter I have to go into another webinar in connection with the Kashmir Yom I don't know, Istiqlal, yes. Sorry about that. So first, comments very much for having put me on the panel. It's a pleasure always to vent out my frustrations, my thoughts, and share with you whatever I think of. Basically, you have asked me to speak on the role of media and the CVE. You have already have had enough presentations, and I really don't want to go into the theory. I don't have a scholarly presentation either, just because this is such a broad subject. I thought I'll just speak off the cuff based on my own experiences. Now, the role of media and CVE. First of all, I think there had been actually a lot of confusion about what actually CVE means in Pakistan. What I saw, my interactions with very senior government leaders, including ministers, advisors. So even they actually failed to recognize, to differentiate between counter-radicalization, de-radicalization. And then there were many factors that basically obfuscated the reality. And that confusion, that obfuscation of the reality, of the differentiation, lack of differentiation between the terminology like preventing violent extremism and countering violent extremism and terrorism. So all this thing also has had a direct impact on the way media projected all these events, starting from particularly 2007, when the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, the proxy terror group, emerged. They were all basically, I would say, preying on Pakistan's internal fault lines, multiple fault lines, which is ethnic hatreds, sectarian hatreds. And then on the part of the government, we have had many shortcomings. There was a lack of comprehension of the phenomena, radicalization or terrorism within state structures. There was unwillingness to recognize that this is something that can spiral out of control at some stage. For Pakistani state institutions, terrorism or these militant groups were basically either as instruments of foreign policy or instruments of peace management, particularly in the tribal areas. So, we have to understand how the state institutions looked at these various manifestations of terrorism, which I think are actually, or have been actually, proxy terrorists used to magnify the problems inside Pakistan and exploit the shortcomings in how Pakistan is being governed, how faith is being tackled, and how faith was used as an instrument to motivate people for jihad in Kashmir, for jihad in Afghanistan, realizing little that it would have ramifications, implications for socio-economic, socio-political ramifications for Pakistan. And this is what actually it went out to become, until the December 2014 Army Public School terror struck, in which nearly 150 people, mostly children, were killed by terrorists. And I think it was the time when Pakistani state institutions finally realized that they basically, what they were facing was proxy terrorism, and nothing that could qualify as religiously driven ideological fighters who were out there to occupy and capture the state of Pakistan. So this all impacted the way media projected these issues. I remember when TTP phenomena was raging in 2009, I guess. So one of the prime TV channels sent its DSNG, a satellite van, into remote mountains, and just to get interviews of 4 Pakistani commandos who had been held by the Taliban, by these terrorists at that time. So for half an hour, this went on. Nobody bothered to realize as to what impact this would have on the entire security apparatus when a private TV channel sends for a live interviews. It was like a prosecution, questioning, interrogation of the 4 Pakistan Army commandos who had been captured by the Taliban. So this was an extremely reckless way, the way media got into it. And even otherwise, in 2008, 9, 10, there were many occasions when there were gunfights between the security forces and the Taliban or these terrorists, and they were being carried live. And then the media, the cameras would zoom into the faces of government officials, of security people. So this was a time when I personally intervened, requesting a number of senior people at that time and the directors at various channels, asking them to get into place some sort of code for journalists, for the field operators, for the field reporters, and the producers to go by. You know, you can't be so recklessly projecting every state functionary on the television, because then he or she becomes a sitting duck. He becomes the obvious target once he or she has been identified. So I think there was a lot of reckless, irresponsible reporting in those days. Particularly, I'm talking of the very bloody years between 2008 and 2012. So there was this all then complicated how we dealt the issue of CVE or PVE. There was not real calibration of what this phenomena is and how this should be projected. Now, there are certain challenges to how the media can report or reports elements which we consider as radical, as terrorists, as inimical to the interests of the dominant majority of one country or the other country. Now, the challenge is age of overinformation. So right now, we are overflowing with information on our cell phones and our televisions and computers. Then there is a rat race for rating. So every private channel basically tries to outdo the other. In that rat race, often the producers, the reporters, the anchors forget what they are actually getting into. Like there have been live coverages, even political talk shows which had leaders from banned political organizations. The amplification of their message, the multiplication of their message came through the media, through mainstream media. So a number of leaders of banned organizations like TLP, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, they'd been appearing on various TV channels, and the producers, the anchors, didn't give it a thought at all whether at all they should be getting these people on air just because they belong to a banned organization, and hence even the common sense, the professional norm would require them not to give them that precious airtime. The second factor, the third big factor, is the commercial considerations while prioritizing subjects. So wherever the particularly private TV channels see blood, violence, they lunge for it without considering as to what impact this could have on, for instance, younger viewers of television, or those young people who have access to television on their cell phones. So there is not enough regard for the impact, psychological impact that the glorification, magnification of terrorist groups or radical groups can have on, particularly on young minds. Then political polarization within the society. This also has an impact on how media projects or reports certain issues, because we have to keep in mind, we have a couple of mainstream religio-political parties. So depending on which mainstream party this religio-political party is aligned to, this projection of views, basically, which are coming from the parties affiliated to these religio-political parties, also becomes a problem. Like any proxy terrorist groups, that I call them proxy terrorist groups, if they are somehow ideologically affiliated with the school of thought of Jamiat Ulama Islam, then it becomes a problem, because Jamiat Ulama Islam has been a partner with mainstream political parties, whether it was Pakistan People's Party or the People's Party. So this also has, I think, severely impacted how the media has projected this CV or PV issues. Then external influences, of course, whether it's US, it's India, or Afghanistan, they also have had their impact on Pakistan's efforts to counter terrorism, to counter radicalization, because these external influences also exploit the internal fault lines, which are ethnic, which are sectarian, which are political. So basically, a lot of then TV channels, either inadvertently or consciously, they leap at information they think serves their purpose, may serve their purpose. But in the long run, that impacts how people think about these religious or political groups who basically have a militant agenda and which basically aligns actually with terrorist organizations such as Al-Qaeda or ISIS. Then another point is disinformation, that how media can fall victim to disinformation, and there have been various instances all through these at least 15 years of counter-terror campaign that Pakistan has seen, that the producers or anchors, they don't really give enough consideration to news items they basically wish to convey to their viewers. And if you apply the professional scrutiny, and if you apply the national security scrutiny as devised by the National Anti-Terror Plan, we call it National Action Plan for Counterterrorism. So then, a lot of these news items will basically fail the scrutiny. Now, of course, there have been a potent ground, very fertile ground for a lot of elements that we don't like, that we call proxy terrorists or radicals or violent extremists. For them to thrive, there was a conducive environment until a certain point of time. And that was because, on the one hand, there was sort of acceptance, silent acceptance of such groups, because they had a foreign policy objective. On the other hand, these groups then also used intimidation to silence opposition or to bend their narrative through the media in a certain way. There was intimidation also by certain state institutions at some time. So this has had a very adverse impact on Pakistan's effort as far as countering violent extremism or preventing violent extremism is concerned. Pakistan has come a long way, no doubt. This one must underline in the last 10 years or so, particularly since the Army Public School attack. There have been a lot of reforms undertaken within the police, and also the state institution had to also recalibrate under the influence of the Financial Action Task Force Action Plan that was imposed on us in June 2018. But as a whole, I think this counterterrorism strategy has worked. The incidence of terrorism has drastically gone down. All we see right now is proxy terrorism that is taking out basically a lot of security personnel from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa to the Balochistan province. There's still almost every day security personnel are getting killed. But the challenges still remain. The challenge on the education level, because we have a very, very long way to go to sanitize our curriculum. We have a very, very long way to take on the curricula that is taught at the religious seminaries. There's several thousand of them meanwhile. And this also gets a little bit resonated in the media. So as a whole, our challenge is how to address the software problems. The software is the soft power of the state, the soft power that is the rule of law, how to make all religious institutions, particularly religio-political parties, as well as the religious seminaries, fall in basically into compliance with what the National Action Plan had dictated. So we have come a long way, but we still have a longer way to go as far as countering terrorism, countering violent extremism is concerned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Imtiaz Gul Saab, for your presentation and critically looking at the role of media in countering violent extremism. And you have rightly pointed out the immature role of media in sensitizing various incidents occurring in the country. And also you have rightly pointed out the role of the state in helping pro-state groups get media coverage. So with this, I open the floor for question answer, and there are two questions for you here I've got from the audience. One is related to the banning of TLP. Was banning TLP for CVE the only solution to the situation, or we have some other means to cope with the matter too?
Okay, you want to ask me the second question as well?
The second question is, can you give us any idea that how community show resilience to violent extremism? There is one question from our speaker who spoke yesterday, Fayaz Saab. Academics are frequently consulted by electronic media in foreign countries. Why media in Pakistan does not encourage or involve academics in a specialized and more beneficial discourse on terrorism or political violence? This will also exercise spurious experts.
Okay, thank you very much. Very difficult questions. Banning TLP, whether that is one way of CVE. Administratively, yes. I think anything that is inimical to the public interest, anything that threatens the interests of Pakistan or the people of Pakistan should be neutralized, I think, through proper legislation in a legal way. And banning such an entity, I think, is the first step that the state can take. But as I said, we have a longer way to go in creating a resilient framework, a resilient social framework against violent extremism or against terrorism. And that actually brings me to the second question, this idea of community resilience. You know, in our country, there has been a perception that certain state institutions have been hand in glove with certain organizations. So that created an air of fear, an environment of apprehension among the majority of citizens. So with the result that within the community, when we go to the Friday prayers, when we go for Eid prayers or other prayers, we hear the imam talks sometimes rubbish things, very unscientific things, which go also against the spirit of the rule of law, which go against the spirit of social cohesion. But not one of us stands up to challenge that mullah or that imam in as to why he is saying these things. Like I remember when COVID struck in March 2000 last year. So most of the mullahs, they were just talking rubbish, and they say, "Oh well, you can continue coming to the mosque. That it won't happen. Allah will protect us." I heard this with my own ears because we had gone to a funeral of a friend. So the community resilience comes from courage. The community resilience comes also on the back of some sort of assurance that the rule of law will come in force and that the community will stick together. Our problem has been that people have been meek, coward, a lot of people, they don't speak up. So expecting only the state to take action against such people. Whereas we also have to understand, it's, I think, particularly for the younger people to understand that what is state? State comprises people. We are part of the state. We are the state. So unless we start speaking up, unless we start politely, diplomatically challenging the mullah who is talking nonsense when it comes to scientific issues or when it comes to legal issues, it will be very difficult to encourage. Actually, it will be very difficult to counter these violent extremist thoughts. On the other hand, the state also has to increase its access for poor students. Our public sector education system is in a shambles. So there are not enough incentives for poor people, poor parents to send their children. So that the Madaris are just one way of getting rid of one or two children, because then once you have abandoned or given your child to the Madrasa, then you basically forget about it. So this means one worry less for the parents. So here comes the state role, the role of the state institutions to reinforce and expand the public sector education and also to incentivize it. So we still lack that, and that's why I think we are still seeing the mushrooming of religious seminaries. And it's no rocket science to understand that the religious seminaries have a very inclusive sort of very narrow-handed curriculum, worldview, which produces people who are just experts in rote learning, and it's a very narrow view of the world around them. And this is what creates problems for the campaign against CV or PV. And the Fayaz Saab's question about the why academics are not involved, you have to understand, media is a commercial enterprise. They are driven more by ratings, by commercial considerations than by a real academic debate. Often, we have discussions with our anchor persons, many of them are friends. So almost everybody turns back and say, whenever we have an academic-based conversation with some professors, also from the academia or intellectuals, then we get the lowest ratings. So it's a scramble for ratings. It's not scramble for content. It's not scramble for academic debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Imtiaz Gul Saab, for your presentation and touching upon very critical issues related to media. Our last speaker of the day is Dr. Ahmadul Haq Saab, who will be speaking on the role of mosque to avoid violent extremism, a comparative study of East and West. Dr. Ahmad holds a doctorate degree in Islamic finance with particular focus on prohibited business transactions and its financial loss to the society. He has completed his degree, his religious education, Shahadatul Almiya, from a renowned university, Islamic university affiliated with Wafaqul Madaris, Al Arabiya, Pakistan. He also worked as a member of syllabus designing committee for launching postgraduate diploma in Islamic banking and finance constituted by Sheikh Zayed Islamic Center, University of Karachi. He provided his services to the University of East London in reviewing its two courses on for MBA program in Islamic banking. He also served ComSet's University Islamabad Lahore campus as head of the department, and at the same time provided his services to Center of Islamic Finance as in charge Sharia advisory services. He is currently serving Sir Syed University of Engineering and Technology, Karachi, and working as chairperson Business Administration Department and in charge Department of Pakistan and Islamic Studies. So without taking much time, I'll hand over the screen to Ahmadul Haq, who is actually presented here with us. And we expect a very lively discussion after his presentation as well. So over to Ahmad Saab.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Can you hear me? Okay, well, it's
जी डॉक्टर साहब बात करें आप डॉक्टर अहमद साहब बात
Thank you. It's really very difficult to speak in the last. I'm waiting a lot because we are among the organizers, and thank you very much for Dr. Naeem Saab, captain of the ship, and the man behind the scene, Dr. Mustafa Haider, and the person who always supports such programs, Dr. Shafkat Munir Saab, and the organization SCPI, always open to organize such events. So my pleasure to be a part of this wonderful gathering and share my views on the topic role of mosque to avoid violent extremism. And basically, it was approved, funded project approved from SCPI. And I worked a lot on this and the introduction, the paper that it's a qualitative research, comparative study across Eastern and Western cultures. It explores the role of mosque in social order and to analyze their contribution in the contemporary era, Eastern and Western cultures. So this is very interesting and on the other hand, very difficult because research material was less in this area. Most of the people addressed and worked on madrasas, on the role of madrasas, but this topic was less attentive, and when we started working on it. So in Pakistan, due to no system regarding the organized system regarding the mosque or the running of the affairs of mosque and running of the affairs of the people, those are supposed to run the affairs of the mosque. So no regulations were available and no policies were available. And then we realized is that this topic should be more attentive in future. On the upon the findings, the very important, and I want to start with this AVE, means avoid violent extremism. When we joined SCPI, so we had an understanding about CVE, countering violent extremism. But during interviewing session with the different scholars, ulama, and the imams of the mosque, we realized that the proper word to be used for this is AVE, avoid violent extremism. So this is initially a phrase, avoid violent extremism, neither new nor famous. But as far as concerned violent extremism, so seems a challenge to define this violent extremism because of its diverse factors. Psychologically, it generates different theme or connotation in your mind, social elements, and often unpredictable aspects which make it complex. So AVE is preferred to define as to replace the opportunities offering violent extremism by welcoming healthy and beneficial activity. So in other words, we can say that AVE means to choose among the alternatives, among the best alternatives. So it is not mere the rise of a new vocabulary as nearly happened between counter and prevent as PVE and CVE. So for explicit view, a brief semantic study, if the word counter gives the sense of combat, the word prevent gives the sense of stop, then the sense of choose other can be extracted from the word avoid. Contextually, CVE is the state of war according to the study. PVE is the state of control but not resolved, while AVE will be the next step to resolve by launching alternative and mutually beneficial tasks. So this is the main or the core of the research work, that we should use the word AVE, which will convince the audience to listen the issue, because when we use the word counter, it means that we are combating something and we are in the state of war. So the opponent is not ready to listen or feel some sort of difficulty to listen. So a theoretical study, so these steps can be theoretically translated to religious extremism, according to some research, with reference to different research, the good, the bad, and the deadly. So means definitely when you show your affiliation with the undisputed beliefs in your religion, so this extremism is good. But when you want to convince some other forcefully to believe in what you believe, so this is bad and sometimes deadly. So CVE is used for deadly, PVE is used for bad, while to shift from bad to good, there will be definitely AVE. This is according to the research. So mosque in Eastern context could not gain much value in academia equivalent to its potential, especially to avoid violent extremism. From the very beginning, means when we observe the Russian jihad, or when we try to get the analysis of jihad against communism, so from that to now, this area was less attentive, and the more focus of the scholars or the reformers was towards the Madaris, towards the Madrasa. Its potential is highlighted by a number of studies exploring its contribution in social, educational, and spiritual development of communities. In general, when you see when you observe the role of mosque and madrasa, so as far as concerned, madrasa, a building providing education to the limited students. So there we see that a specific number of students, limited number of students with a specific syllabus. But when we see the role of mosque, so 5 times prayers a day, different age group of the people, different participants from upper class, lower class, middle class, educated, literate, illiterate, everyone is going to mosque and having something from the imam directly or indirectly. So observing this, I think the role of mosque should be more critical, and there should be a system for the appointment of imam or the training of imam and the different programs related to the training and development program of the Aimma Ikram. So meaning of mosque, it's simple. I would not like to go in depth. We know that a place of Muslim worship or a place of worship. Historical development of mosque is important, and this is because when we see the evolutionary process of the mosque building, so it's, from the very beginning, early Islamic era, the founding function of mosque was worship. Administrative office means you can also see the history, the role of mosque, where it contributed as the state headquarters, the first mosque established by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Masjid Nabawi. So everything discussed in the mosque with the companion of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it was just like a state headquarters, and its pulpit authorized as constitutional chair. So when we move forward, we see the monarchy, after Khilafat system, after Khulafai Rashidi, when we see the different monarchies. So constitutional status of pulpit was moved from Imam to Khalifa or King. So initially, the Khalifa was the main person who led the different gatherings in the mosque and the prayers, but with the passage of time, the different structure of the hierarchical structure of the state, it convinced to people or to Muslims that the worldly matters should be treated different and the religious matters should be treated differently. So then colonial period and afterward, a mosque was considered solely a place of worship. After 1857 rebellion, it developed into a self-reliant community center. So before colonial period and after colonial period, we can see the major difference when the mosque was financially supported by the state, but after colonial period, it was not financially supported by the state. So the affairs of the mosque, its maintenance, its generating its expenditures, definitely based on the community service. So a unique importance of mosque, the emblem of Islamic society. There is no doubt 5-time gathering. There is no doubt weekly Friday sermon or the major sermons into Eid in the Muslim culture. So what is important here to be noted that all Muslims appear diligently leaving material benefits in the mind of in the mid of their day and listen sermon carefully and offer prayer without any special invitation and food stuff. So when you whenever you feel that there is a prayer time, so we leave everything and we go to the mosque directly, and this invitation on the basis of nothing convinced us, and we leave everything. We leave every material benefit and go to attend the assembly. It means that the role should be very critical, and it should the methodology was adopted in my this research work. So comparative study has been designed because of the following points. First, European Muslims seems more peaceful as compared to Muslims in Pakistan. Secondly, academia has focused on European mosques through various perspectives, while the performance and structures of Pakistani mosques lack academic attention. Thirdly, freedom of speech is common in both contexts because of democracy. So, locale and duration was Lahore, Karachi, Quetta, Peshawar in Pakistan, Ottawa, New York, Paris, and London internationally. So, it started in the last quarter of 2020, and a research tool, qualitative, formal and informal interviews and observations, interviews of 8 experts, 4 researchers, and 4 Islamic scholars of mosque studies and community resilience for the better understanding of the main factors, interviewing from foreign cities conducted using Skype and WhatsApp. So this is the sample. 80 Jamia mosques, 10 from each city equally from east and west, selected randomly, and the researcher attended all Friday sermons to observe the content and public behavior nationally, definitely in Pakistan, within the country. From West, 30 recordings of Friday sermon have been received by the imams, while remaining 10 has been completed from available on internet. Data analysis means formal interviews transcribed, informal interviews and observations, key points, notes. Data has been manually analyzed and divided according to the factors. Now, discussion and analysis about the system of mosque. What we concluded that huge diversity, self-regulation system, and lack of central system. There is no central system. When we discuss about the financial system and the management of financial system, even on the basis of Islamic teachings, we have a complete system over there. But when we discuss about the management, about the running the affairs of the mosque, so it is based on self-regulation system and lack of central system. Imam, committee, custodian, Friday sermon. The developed housing societies have central control system in some areas of the country, like Lahore, Karachi, in the special societies, DHA area. But a vast number of Muslims are being controlled directly by the madrasas, which are not physically attached with them. In Pakistan, mosques are being established on sect basis. This is the finding. Unfortunately, sects also have not their own central mosque system like Madrasa, Wafa. So different madaris, they are affiliated with some body, with some organization. There is a body which actually recognizes the madaris, but there is no system as far as concerned mosque. So appraisal, there are definitely some advantages and some strong features. Almost all mosques are peaceful, well functioned and self-financed. Management committees pay full attention and devotion to its affairs. Imam enjoy respect, love, consideration, and appreciation to an unbelievable extent, even within a very low pay as compared to public servants. All performance executed punctually on right time without any minor delay. Above all, in Pakistan, this is also very interesting that having or working with this on this low pay, no protest has been ever recorded by imams. So this is also again very interesting that we do not see any protest by the imams that they are portrayed. Sectarianism. So the majority of mosques established on the name of sect or school of thought in Pakistan. So this is unfortunate. We see the very positive role in the mosque established by DHA or Bahria. So DHA Lahore promoted this slogan that all mosques for all Muslims without means differentiation of any sect. This is also the conclusion of the study. Literacy rate is very important because in Pakistan we see that the mosques which are established or which are run by the developed societies in Pakistan, and so these societies are running it very well, and the result is very fruitful and beneficial. Imam in irregular developed societies, mosques become part of sectarianism, supported by less educated, irrational, and emotional people. So literacy is one of the factors. So areas where the literacy rate is low, people are violent, even Imam is violent, while area where the literacy rate is high, there people are not violent, and Imam is also can be used as a symbol. So Imam, social status of Imam in Pakistan, Imam is only subjected to mosque. Training system in Europe, the training system of imams can be traced in 1980s, which got vivid attention in 2000. So the European Council of Moroccan Ulama is one of the examples. In Pakistan, it is a deficiency of the training of imam at national level. In Madrasa, there is absence of module for the responsibilities of imam. And on the other hand, DHA Lahore organizes training seminars for improving sermon delivering style, advocating religious harmony, avoiding sectarianism and modern social issues. Freedom of speech is one of the factors ignored in Pakistan, supported in Europe, but legislation against hate speech is demanded by PEP, which we think that will be implementable in near future. So content of the sermon, there is no organized or arranged content, especially in the areas where the literacy rate is low, and normally we listen the hate speeches from the same mosques of such areas. But the areas where people are literate and the environment is healthy and good, like the mosque in DHA and the mosque in Bahria. So they are well organized, and there is one person who is the leader of all imams in the mosque located in that area. So first he approved the topic, and then the sub imams, they are supposed to prepare the content according to the approval of the head imam. So violation of public rights. So this is another thing, because the study proves that if our imams are well trained, so we will not see anything hitting the norms and culture of the society. So gathering of unnecessary crowd and blocking the roads can also be avoided through the training of imam. However, such issues cannot be seen in the West because imams are well trained and well educated. So we actually suggested in the paper that side by side, as we have already introduced national action plan, but to implement this, we also need nation action plan in 4 steps. Begins from the self-reformation, which is taqwa, inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. Second, the personal, self-responsibilities. At third, social responsibilities, and finally, national responsibilities should be emphasized. So Suggestions. So a syllabus should be compulsory for imams outlining the modern social and national and legal values. Number two, legislation to make effective PEP and its implementation. Number three, custodian and imams are two major pillars. None of them should be ignored, especially in the scenario where it is on the basis of the contribution of the people of that society. Number four, judges and administrators hold the burden of reformation and management, while imams are unaware about the social and managerial problems. Number five, to avoid sectarian content, the soft policy should be outlined to make religious people and imams busy in the task of social reformation. Number six, to get the final successful result of national action plan, it is need to launch nation action plan to make people realize about their social and national responsibilities. And the last one, the content of sermon should be switched to the public responsibility. So the main conclusion of this research was mosque in Pakistan required more attention and more focus as compared to madrasa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmad, for your presentation and giving us a fruit of thought on coining a very new term, avoiding violent extremism, rather than using countering violent extremism or preventing counter extremism. Definitely, this would also lead us to work more on this concept of avoiding violent extremism in the Pakistani society. I have so far received two questions for you from our students in a private message group. One question is related to, the student is seeking your suggestions basically. Can you give any, can you suggest any model where there is no dispute or contradiction among the ulamas of different sects? That is one question. Second question is, you have discussed the significance of training and seminars arranged for imams in the Western countries. Do you have any example which assume the efficiency or efficacy of this system here in Pakistan?
Yes, Dr. Interesting question. I would like to answer with reference. Well, we different ulama, they provide their contributions to the different Islamic banks in Pakistan. So, ulama from Barelvi sect, ulama from Bandi sect, ulama from Ahl Hadith sect, because different identities are there. When they provide their services to banks, so we see no conflict over there. So if there is a means, if we want to know about the features of any product launched by Islamic banks, so although different ulamas, they are providing their services having different sects, but we see no difference over there. But the same person, when he offers his services in the mosque, so we see a lot of differences. Can you hear me, doctor? So, so this, on the basis of this, I say that this is the best example. When we are running our financial system, having different scholars from the different sects without facing any conflict or any contradiction. So the same can be done in this area, but it requires proper concrete policy. Number one. Your second question, any example? So we actually, when I was working at our Lahore campus. So I was in charge of the advisory services over there. So we planned a program on the awareness of Islamic banking and finance and its future in Pakistan. So the program was funded by the State Bank of Pakistan. So there what we did, we tried to conduct 2 days workshop in the all campuses of ComSets, followed by Juma Khutbah and address. I was the part of that workshop. So we invited 80 plus ulama in the area where the different campuses of ComSets situate. So in the beginning of the all workshops, the appearance, the gesture poster, the statement, the views of ulama were different, but while leaving the campus, the opinion was different. So just start a discussion with them and have fruitful interaction under a specific policy and direction. So I think that you will see the change, you will see the difference in the society. So that's why I say that when the same scholars from the different sects, when they work in consideration of some money, and when they perform paid activity, so we see no conflict. But when they perform welfare activity, we see many conflicts. So it means there is something lacking behind it. So there is one
Okay, there is the last question, and I would expect a very brief answer, and then we'll conclude the 2 days conference. The last question is how this term, avoiding violent extremism, will give you more better result as compared to the CVE or PVE?
Actually, when you start your argument, the word that you are wrong, I'm preparing against you. So it actually creates problem. So to my view, according to my opinion, we should start with the argument that should be acceptable for not only for you or your audience, but the opponent party. So when you say that avoid violent extremism, this is in accordance to the message of Quran, when Allah states in Surah Furqan, "Iza khatabahumul jahiluna qalu salama." So what is the meaning of this? Means during your interaction with illiterate people, so do not indulge in anything. Just say that this is your path and this is my path, and just means choose among the alternatives. So the alternatives which are in front of you, you can choose A or B or C. So different alternatives are there. So this is that's actually during interviewing section with the different ulama. I got this, that whenever I started this countering violent extremism, so the interview was converted into some sort of debate or Madrasa. But when we started our discussion with this, that we want to avoid violent extremism, so they were happy and there was a space of discussion. That's why I think that on the basis of this experience, I think that we should use AVE, not CVE. Although we are working on CVE.
Okay, thanks a lot, and I must appreciate your presentation, being the last speaker of the day. So here, in the end, I would like to present vote of thanks. So in the very first place, I am highly thankful to our speakers, both national and international, for their terrific presentations and intellectual input to look at the issue of violent extremism and countering violent extremism very critically and academically. I would also like to thank SDPI Islamabad and Creative Learning Washington DC for not only funding this conference, but also the whole project. Many thanks to Dr. Shafkat Munir and Muhammad Awais for their continuous support and help throughout this project. And I expect more collaborative projects in future too. So since this exercise, organizing this conference online is very less expensive, so I hope that in future we'll continue these sort of efforts until this pandemic comes over. I'm also thankful to Department of Public Administration, University of Karachi, and Dr. Mustafa Haider and his team for providing technical support to organize this conference very smoothly. Being chapter members, I also appreciate the role and support of Dr. Mustafa Haider and Dr. Ahmadullah. Both have continuously supported this conference and made this successful. Last but not the least, I'm also thankful to the participants belonging to different backgrounds, especially our students, for their constant interest and participation on both days of the conference and asking very critical questions from the speakers. In the end, I also once again thank you all with the hope that once the pandemic situation gets better, we'll organize in-person conferences. And this is the history of the Department of International Relations, University of Karachi, that we have been organizing various national and international workshops every year. So we'll continue this aspect as well, and in future we'll organize more conferences and invite people in person. So once again, thank you all. So any comment or any feedback from his SDPI if anybody is present? Otherwise, we can close the session. Okay, thank you very much. Someone is speaking?